to understand data. Where does it come from? How trustworthy is it?
We want to be data-driven, but we want the data to say this.
Really getting people to understand and to believe in data that it adds value to them.
Governance without return is just a cost.
Data governance is the technology and the methodology and the processes of making sure that the data that you collect and manage and integrate is high quality.
It's one of the prerequisites for anything that you do in data. It's one of those foundations that most people just don't see or don't want to do because it's cumbersome. It's the underlying rules, processes, and methodologies on how to treat data, how to tackle access, how to tackle ownership for data sources, for example, how to tackle ownership for a business intelligence system, a marketing intelligence system, ownership for ETL, for example, et cetera, et cetera. That's a big part of it, but I think that the term itself is quite fluid and quite big, and everybody understands something different. For me, as dumb as it sounds, sometimes data governance is about the definition of governance.
Data governance is really two different things, right? Because one thing is the traditional thing about data quality and actually making sure that the quality of data is something that is legally within limits, right? So it's the GDPR thing, making sure that you are legal in your setup and you have the right different aspects of things. But where we find data governance as something interesting is also tapping into the next level of it and actually saying, we are now in a place where data can do stuff on its own. So making sure that if data does stuff on its own, I need to trust the data I have. And very often we're in a situation that data might be legal but worthless. And then it's only semi-governance in the sense that I have it and it's compliant with the legal side of things, but I cannot use it to create any value for the organization. And then it's just a cost.
Data governance is collecting, using, applying data in a way that's appropriate to conform with best practices and law, and what the intent of your organization is, what your organizational intent is for how the data is to be used. So you want to use the data properly, legally, accurately, and transparently.
I think it's structure.
In order to make data governance work in a corporation, you need some sort of technology, doesn't really matter what. But mostly you need solid processes that everybody in the company agrees to. So you have to have that change management process of getting people to buy into the value so that they're willing to execute on the process.
At the core of a good data governance is top-down, where you need buy-in from leadership so that all the practices within the organization are tied to appropriate data governance and complying. Because one of the problems I see with organizations when they try to get around, avoid their responsibilities, if that's coming from the top, then parts of the organization will find ways to avoid doing the things they should do. So it needs to start with the top and having the culture of the organization aligned with proper data governance.
Basically, this should be at the core of what the company owns, but you can have somebody external who helps the structuring, who helps with best practices, who helps with a framework maybe even on how to tackle that, the various parts of data governance that you should look into. Also the parts that people usually don't want to look into, like data security, for example, cybersecurity.
If a company is looking at outsourcing some of their data governance efforts, the technology can be brought in from wherever. You don't have to build your own. And you could bring in a consulting company to do a data governance audit to find out where you are and where you'd like to get. But actually executing on the creation of a data governance program is, again, it's corporate change management. So it requires people inside the company getting people to agree, and that is not going to happen from the outside.
I think the difference is that classic companies simply rely on gut feeling, and on hypotheses that are not validated by data. And data-driven companies do the same thing. They form hypotheses, they have a great gut feeling in many cases, but where possible, they add a layer of data to confirm, to make it faster. That's on the decision-making side. On the automation side, yeah, I mean, there's so much that companies can do in terms of the data-driven automation. It doesn't always have to be, great Tableau dashboard of blah, blah, blah to make a better decision. Sometimes it can be just like a stupid process that can be done by a computer. And good data-driven companies, they're like, yeah, why don't we just automate the hell out of it and then get rid of it on the human side and, take that human labor and add add to the process the human intelligence.
It's the ability to act on the data, right? Because you can actually say there's a lot of companies that go in and spend a lot of resources on gathering data but do not do anything with it. And that's not data-driven, right? That's just data hoarding, right? The drive is making things happen based on the data. So the key thing is probably that data is respected as a source of activation. That there's a reason why we have the data, and the data will help us get inside and make decisions. So I think the first thing they need to do is they need to have the why on place, right? So they need to understand why they're doing analytics and data in the first place. Because it's real easy to do a lot of data gathering, but if you don't have a direction, then it's pointless. And you can spend too much time on governance and too little time on business. And very often that's what we see, that data gathering becomes the key focus and not the value creation from the data. And it's in the value creation that we justify analytics. So I've been talking a long time about a term called return on analytics, which a lot of people don't like because it actually means that analytics is an investment. But I think it really is important to focus on that part, because governance without return is just a cost.
To be data-driven, a company has to understand the value of data from the top down. So we have gone thousands of years of making decisions without data, but we have made decisions based on experience. That's never going to stop. We do not want a company that makes decisions only on data. We want them to have their heart and soul in it, and to be data informed and perhaps insight driven, but insights come from inside based on the data. So being data driven, being data informed, being insight driven, that means everybody really understands that data is an important piece of the decision-making process.
I would say in a lot of cases now, with the speed of data can do things on its own. So I actually have used the picture a lot, saying that in the old days we used to talk about data being really tight thing, would be like a symphony orchestra trying to work together, and everybody had their specific roles. But what we found is, from our perspective, is the world is way too complicated for that. There's too much stuff going on, so very often it's much more like a jazz band. People have to have room to kind of play instruments together, but we have to support each other much more freestyle, and we have to make room for solos, and we have to make each other sound good. So not just about one conductor standing making sure that everybody plays the notes, but it's making sweet music together.
What we've done is we've taken steps, small, tiny steps towards it, where we saw that this actually works very well.
All organizations want to be data-driven that I see today. But one of the interesting parts of data-driven mindset is this. Sometimes with some of our clients, they say we want to be data-driven, but then when you show them what the data says, they say, but that's not really what we're interested in. What we're interested in, we want to be data-driven, but we want the data to say this. And part of a true data-driven organization is to contextualize the data, understand the data, use the data where the data leads you. But one caution, that does not mean that the data is always true or correct. And so just because the data says something doesn't mean it's true in the sense that we want to understand the process, because data can be collected incorrectly, incompletely. There can be biases in the data. So data-driven does mean you follow where the data leads you, but it mostly tells you to ask why. Why is the data looking like it looks, so that you can uncover what the truth and reality of what your customers or whatever data you're collecting really is about.
I think this is one of the hardest questions of all.
Yes, it is necessary for employees to have an analytical mindset, and that's going to require data literacy. It's not about mathematics, which we had trouble with in school because we had terrible math teachers. So I'm not good at math. I hate math. That's fine. But to understand data, where does it come from? How trustworthy is it? How difficult is it? That's an important data literacy. Then that's just training. That's getting people used to the idea so that they then understand the value, so that they can apply it and become an insight-driven organization.
For organizations where there are many people who are driven by a gut feel and they're hesitant to adopt a data-driven mindset or an analytic mindset, I think small wins are very important. So projects where analytics are used to help inform decisions that are not, as we say in the US, not hitting home runs, but you're hitting singles. You're doing small things and small victories, because the ideal analytics solutions to me tells you 80% obvious, 20% a little head scratching, and people go, I never thought of it that way. And then after a little thought, they go, yeah, but that makes sense. So those kinds of hidden insights and gems should come up, but it should not be the number one driver. If that's happening in a dominant way, people won't believe it. So they need the analytics to say the obvious things first, and then at the second or third level, come up with those insights that they never thought of before.
Getting people to understand and to believe in data that adds value to them. And one of the first things, it sounds super stupid and very simple actually, is what we call data meetings. So every meeting that you have that's more important, you add data to the first 10 minutes. So instead of diving right into the discussion, you get everybody on the same page by just saying, hey, let's look at the data first. We'll look at the facts, not the opinions. And we have an analyst in the room that if a hypothesis within the meeting that comes up that can be looked into right away. And that usually leads to two things. First, people's analytical mindset or analytical skills are improved, and it makes them want to be more analytical. And the other one, and this is one of the fantastic ones that also then puts number one into much better perspective, is you actually get much more actions done within that meeting, because you can take action right away. And that usually leads to higher satisfaction with that meeting. You actually have an outcome of that meeting, and people are like, hey, data led to that. And if I use this, I get from talking to action much quicker and actually get shit done.
But the key thing on the analytics mindset is actually the conclusion and going for the insights. Because if we just analyze for analyzing's sake, then we're not moving anything, right? So we need to have this, it's not a nice term, but saying profit-driven approach as well, saying, why do we have the data? We need the data to be able to move the business because the business pays our salary. So at the end of the day, it's about the profit and not necessarily just about the data. Web analyst is a horrible name because it's very passive. It doesn't carry any responsibility. So what we should do, instead of calling ourselves web analysts, we should be data-driven business developers. That's kind of where the future is, and then that's where we create value and kind of accept our role in the organization. We do not just do reports, we build organizations and create value.